Our opening words this morning are from the Reverend Stephen Schick in Troubled Times. From the loneliness of troubled times, we come to discover that we are not alone. Into this dwelling place of togetherness, we come to collect remnants of hope. From fear that all is lost, we come to discover what will save us. Into the comfort of each other's arms, we come to feel the strength that has not yet vanished. From darkness, we come to wait until our eyes begin to see. Into the refuge of fading dreams, we come to remove illusions and focus new visions. From despair and walks alone, we come to travel together. Into the dwelling place of generations, we come to pledge allegiance to being peace and doing justice. So, what is today? April 21st. So this is the end of our series this spring on becoming bridge builders. And we've been talking a lot about what that means as a metaphor or a career path to learn about how we make connections across differences. And today we have one more Wonder Box in this series. I'm wondering who might want to open the Wonder Box. Kaylee. Sorry. Oh, thank you. Oh, thank you. You can go sit down. Thank you. Oh, it's one of my favorite gifts. This is a little poem that was framed and given to me by my brother when I was ordained. Oh, it says, "Where the sidewalk ends." Anyone familiar with that word, though, that poem? Yeah? Does anyone know who wrote that? So that's a bigger question, yeah? Let's start with that. Wow, great. And the first one, yes? Shel, that's right. Oh my gosh, Shel Silverstein, one of my favorite poets growing up. And this poem was given to me as a really nice gift from my brother, who is an economist and doesn't, this is a really thoughtful gift. And I have it hung up in my office, and I turn to it every now and then. And what I love about it, we know the phrase "where the sidewalk ends," right? I mean, we know that kind of concept, but do we know the whole poem? It's a little complicated. It has a little bit of double edge here. I'm just going to read it real quick, okay? Got time? Okay. There is a place where the sidewalk ends and before the street begins. And there the grass grows soft and white, and there the sun burns crimson bright, and there the moonbird rests from his flight to cool in the peppermint wind. Sounds good. Let us leave this place where the smoke blows black and the dark street winds and bends. Past the pits where the asphalt flowers grow, we shall walk with a walk that is measured and slow, and watch where the chalk white arrows go to the place where the sidewalk ends. Yes, we'll walk with a walk that is measured and slow, and we'll go where the chalk white arrows go for the children. The children and youth, they mark, and the children and youth, they know the place where the sidewalk ends. Deep. What does that mean? What does that mean to you? Yes? Oh, deep. What does deep mean? That's really good. Like that. That was deep as meaning. What is that poem about? Sometimes what this reminds me of is that we are kind of always kind of in between places in our journey where the sidewalk ends and before the street begins. How many of you have like a sidewalk where you live or a place you walk, and sometimes they just sort of stop out of nowhere? There's one that's kind of coming in on Goler here, and it just sort of stops, And it's like, better turn around, nothing this way. And I'm always like, oh, darn, we should have pathways to go everywhere. And then we also have another one. I'm wondering if you know about this one. It's somewhere on our property and it kind of goes that direction and it ends by a big shed. Does anyone know that sidewalk? It might be a painting on a big building over there. By the temple. Yes. And actually recently we poured more what's that called? Soil and leveled off where this big kind of dip goes and where it kind of collects water and gets messy. And as a result, people, when they're walking from one building to another, have to walk across the parking lot. And we know that sometimes the parking lots are not safe. And sometimes people are wearing their beautiful dresses or clothes or wearing shoes that they don't want to get muddy, but they have to walk around that way. And so we filled this in for drainage purposes, but also for symbolic, beautiful reasons that we might create a path between our two buildings. Is that like a boring, like technical thing, or like, is that like a really awesome, cool thing? Okay, kind of both. Okay. This is good. This is good. He's keeping me honest. It's both, but it's also this beautiful thing that we can't even imagine what happens when we close that gap between where our sidewalk ends and before their sidewalk begins. So this day and in all the places we go, look for those spaces where there's a little gap and figure out if you can help close it. It might not be with concrete. It might be more with kindness. It might be more with love. It might be like helping hand. And I hope that through that image and whenever we pour that concrete, we can dedicate that path, that's something that we can continue to grow in as Unitarian Universalists. That sound good? All right. I'm watching you. All right. Let's sing our children and youth out to their classes this morning.
We are at a time in our society where we are more divided than any time since the Civil War. We are also at a crossroads of being able to save our existence on this planet. I serve on the Human Rights Commission. We try to mitigate harms that come to those who live in the margins. But our work here in interfaith and courageous action is preemptive work. We bring humanity and justice to the way the systems work. We don't need to wait around for the harm to be done. We can build systems that are pluralistic and serve everyone. We have a rare opportunity here in Columbus and at UUCCI to build bridges across religious and spiritual lines because of our history, our shared story, collaborating with other faiths. We urgently need to reach out to those different from ourselves and learn and share our stories, our humanity with each other. Why? Because we must create and build a different future than the trajectory we're on. We must shift our white focus from our tradition of perfection and avoiding discomfort. We need to get okay with the process being messy. We need to strive for a pluralistic future that includes everyone on the planet. The stories we have historically heard through our books and movies have been mostly a white male cisgender voice. Creating a viable future means we need to hear all the stories and learn about all the needs and impacts affected by our daily choices. We need the knowledge and experience and creativity of everyone, not just the few. We can create a future which brings everyone together to provide a healthy and positive world for everyone. Pluralism in every aspect. How much do we really know about the non-white and non-US experience? If we travel, it may be broader, but may still be limited. As humans, we need to connect with those way different. How do we do that? We ask for their stories and we share our own. We are sitting on a gold mine here. Just a few feet away, there are stories and experiences we can't even imagine. This is true with all our interfaith partners. The time is now to tap the connection with this small, safe, committed group and start to heal the small corner of the world. From there, it can continue to ripple outward in all directions and enrich our lives and those of our community and world. It seems like a small step, but is where every movement begins. Together, we imagine and create the world we want to live in. These connections can start locally to impact homelessness, climate change, world hunger, how we use and share water and other resources, healthcare, and what we focus on and on. Our single view cannot fix these shared issues. We need to face our challenges together as brothers, or we shall perish together as fools. We need to be deliberate and intentional in looking for the tools to make it happen, to live into it. I believe we can all start with our personal stories. We need to connect on a personal level with each other and find the bigger story. It's a little thing. It just requires stepping into a little discomfort and learning to be okay with it. Let's all commit to finding our stories and vision of a future where everyone thrives together. Our reading this morning is titled The Civic Good of Interfaith Leadership from the book Interfaith Leadership, a primer by Eboo Patel. The definition of pluralism is drawn largely from political philosophy. It is an attractive destination, but in keeping with the finest traditions of philosophy, a somewhat abstract one. Like the notion of a more perfect union in the preamble to the United States, another phrase from a pen of a political philosopher, it can be approached, but never finally reached. The upside here is that even heading in the direction of pluralisms provides significant benefits, what I'm calling the 5 civic goods of interfaith cooperation. These goods are derived from the social sciences, disciplines that generally seek more concrete outcomes than its counterpart in the academic political philosophy. In continuing with our metaphor of building a bridge toward the destination of pluralism, it is reasonable to ask why anyone would take the time to build a bridge to a place that can never be arrived at. The answer is that the landscape becomes far more beautiful along the way. By moving toward the vision of pluralism and building your bridge to reach that destination, you get to see the benefits of the following 5 civic goods.
1, increasing understanding and reducing prejudice. Interfaith leadership facilitates the flow of contributions by increasing understanding of diverse identities and thereby reducing the barriers erected by prejudice.
2, strengthening social cohesion and reducing the chances for identity-based conflict. By accommodating diverse identity expressions, nurturing positive relationships between different communities, and upholding the broader community we all live within, interfaith cooperation strengthens social cohesion and also creates the conditions for building social capital.
3, bridging social capital and addressing social problems. By bridging the social capital between diverse religious communities and channeling it toward a positive civic purpose, interfaith leaders have the opportunity to make a profound impact on social problems ranging from poverty to disease.
Number 4, fostering the continuity of identity communities and reducing isolation. Interfaith leaders help faith and philosophical communities endure by providing them with a framework and language that helps them positively articulate their own identity in a diverse society, while at the same time building positive relationships with the various people around them.
5, creating binding narratives for diverse societies. Robert Putnam highlights the central role that grand narrative plays in binding together the various identities of a diverse nation. The idea of America as an immigrant nation and the prominent place of e pluribus unum, out of many one, on the Great Seal of the United States gives people of various backgrounds a sense of place and belonging in the United States.
To be clear, these are not the only benefits associated with interfaith cooperation, just the most prominent civic goods. They fall under what might be called the good neighbor paradigm of interfaith work, rather than the fellow seeker model, which highlights the more personal and spiritual dimensions of interfaith engagement.
As we near the end of our 7-week series on becoming bridge builders, I am reminded of a popular story from the Jewish Talmud. The story is about 2 rabbinic scholars who lived a couple hundred years before the Common Era. And these rabbis had diametrically opposed views of Jewish law. Their names were Shammai and Hillel. Now, Shammai was what one might call intense. He was inflexible and really strict in his interpretation of the law, whereas Hillel, on the other hand, was more liberal. He was more tolerant, and you might say he had more chill. One day, a snarky Gentile came to them this is my interpretation, a snarky Gentile came to him and asked them to try to pick a fight between them, between Hillel and Shammai, by asking them to explain the entire Torah while standing on one leg. Incensed, Shammai scolded the person for asking such a foolish thing. One recount says that he hit the Gentile in the head with his stick. Hillel, on the other hand, paused for a second, then lifted a leg and said calmly, "That which is hateful to you, do not unto another. This is the whole Torah. The rest is commentary. And now, go study." As a Unitarian Universalist minister, my colleagues have often reflected a similar sentiment about our own ministries, especially regarding sermons. I cannot tell you how many times I have heard someone say something to the effect of, every minister has really only one sermon, and every other sermon is just an extension of that first one. Indeed, the rest is commentary. Not trivial, but constructive building blocks upon the foundation of that core belief. I feel like in the 7 years we have been together, it is at once hard to believe I haven't run out of things to say to you all, and at the same time, that perhaps I have said it all. And now we are just finding nuance, commentary, and scaffolding for the next chapter of our shared ministry. I think the Bridge Builders series is, for me, commentary on the core belief I hold regarding the essence of our human purpose in life, my one sermon. Namely, that we are all at our deepest essence at that place where our mind or our soul or spirit or conscience or oneness resides, longing to be bridge builders. We long, we ache to live in a world once broken, restored, once walled off, opened like a meadow in spring. I believe we long, whether we can name it or not, to gather upon bridges of our shared existence to experience the sunrise, the day that follows, the coming sunset, and the rest that follows that. This concept of bridge building might seem like a cute metaphor. It might be something that might be a tangential part of our ministry here at UUCCI. But I believe deeply that bridge building is about life and death and everything in between. I believe bridge building is all that we do when we are together. When I talk about our shared ministry, that ministry happens by conceiving of a world where we share and co-create something that is not possible on our own. Shared ministry happens when we bridge within this congregation among two or more of us to imagine more joy or love or compassion or justice in those concentric circles of our living. So when we say as a congregation that our vision is to be a beacon for diverse religious thought and courageous action, I take it seriously. And as your minister, I imagine how to support us all in making that vision out there in the future a reality right here in the now. About 50 people gathered this weekend for the first annual Bridge Builders Summit. Those in attendance here represented 8 communities, 8 religious communities in Columbus, 6 of which are non-Christian. And during our day and a half gathering, we learned from one another. We listened deeply and looked closely at our siblings, our neighbors, our emerging friends, and glimpsed, I believe, at our shared interfaith ministry that is before us. We ate together, we laughed, some cried. There was truth sharing and hard conversations, and there was a deep respect and reverence for our individual and collective humanity. As convener of the Bridge Builders Summit, we ended the session with practical answers to the question, now what? But before we get to that, the impulse for what is next and where we go from there, or where we grow from there, I like that. I want to make sure I offer some reflections on the prerequisite or the answer to the question of, so what? Or why should we practice being bridge builders? To do this, I want to return to my earliest teachings on interfaith leadership, which goes back to 2009, when I met a young man who, now that I think of it, was about my age that I am now. Ibu Patel grew up in the Chicago suburbs, and through the course of his young life, especially in high school and college, he became exceedingly aware of the various worlds in which he lived, or perhaps the various worlds he lived between, as in the worlds into which he didn't fit neatly into any one of them. This led him to study the sociology of religion at the University of Oxford, where he received his PhD. In the early 2000s, he founded the Interfaith Youth Corps, which trains young people in the skills of interfaith leadership in order to affect change and the greater good in society. While Ibu Patel has written many books, and his articles, interviews, and podcast appearances can be viewed with a simple search, it was his 2016 publication of the book Interfaith Leadership, a Primer, that really shifted the work of interfaith leadership to the masses, to the wider community, to the way we can cultivate these leadership and organizational strategies at all layers of our lives. When I was a fellow with the organization in 2009, the other college students from across the country and I were preparing for diverse fields and careers in life. Teachers, doctors, nonprofit leaders, academics, the list goes on. All of these young people, the thesis of IFYC suggests, will be working and influencing culture in a myriad of places. Thus, if we cultivate interfaith leadership and community capacity for bridge building, we can affect systemic change over time. I think there may have been one or maybe two other future religious leaders in the cohort. There was 20 of us from around the nation. But I sense that the application of interfaith leadership would necessitate a slightly different approach in the context of congregational ministry. In other words, how does interfaith leadership get applied to communities like this one at UUCCI in a way that can shape our collective understanding of the world we live in and the dire need for more peace and justice now? The reading from this morning elevates what I see as a clarion call to engage the work of interfaith justice and peacemaking. It answers the question, so what? In it, Eboo Patel lays out the 5 civic goods of interfaith leadership that he sees. When hearing them, you can understand Patel's background, in particular, the sociology of religion. I'd like to speak on each of them briefly and why we as an interfaith community can and must remain mindful of these reasons that our work is essential to the future we dream about and to which we hope to bridge. 1, increasing understanding and reducing prejudice. This one is quite self-evident. When you know someone, even just their name, you come to see their humanity in a brighter light. Understanding replaces ignorance, stereotype, half-truths, and most importantly, fear. In building bridges across differences here on the Interfaith campus and within this congregation as well, gives us tools to model understanding and inclusion in our lives off the campus. One of our special guests at the Bridge Builders Summit, Bibi Barami, spoke often throughout the weekend on the importance of breaking bread with those who are different from you. She literally showed up Saturday morning and baked cookies for everyone. I can't even start how good they were. You missed out. She saw that it is over the dinner table or coffee table that our anxieties and our narrow-mindedness and possibly our hackles go down, and our curiosity, our love and appreciation blooms. It's hard to build a future where bridges outnumber walls if understanding is not a central ingredient in the alchemy. 2, strengthening social cohesion and reducing the chances of identity-based conflict. When we cultivate understanding and we share that with others, the culture of the community shifts. What we cultivate literally cultivates the culture. They are related. Or as Adrienne Marie Brown reminds us, what we pay attention to grows. In a culture of increasing polarization and segregation, we are promoting a counter-cultural expression of intercultural encounter and visions of pluralism, where all thrive and all are celebrated in their unique embodiments of love. Conflict happens. Conflict is a result of our disconnection, sometimes very natural and healthy disconnection. A lot of conflict, though, is reparable. Not all, but some. And the discernment needed as individuals, a congregation, and a wider community will aid us in fostering a community where identity-based conflict is increasingly non-normative, inappropriate, and eventually unacceptable. 3, bridging social capital and addressing social problems. This third example of the civic goods that come from interfaith leadership is one that drew me most and most deeply as a social justice-oriented person. There's something in sociology called social capital. Social capital is, quote, the networks of relationships among people who live and work in a particular society, enabling that society to function effectively, end quote. The theory and the data shows that religious communities contain some of the highest amounts of social capital because within those communities or groups, a group of people have bonded their individual capacity to common causes and commitments. Therefore, when communities, religious or otherwise, focus on a social problem, they have a higher chance of creating a positive impact compared to what they might be able to have done individually. Or, as Aristotle says, the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. Interfaith leadership invites us to imagine a step further in which we bridge our bonded social capital, our bonded social capital into an exponentially greater force for good in the world. Bridging social capital allows for our longings of a more just and equitable society to be closer at hand. 4, fostering the continuity of identity communities and reducing isolation. Ibu Patel writes, interfaith leadership help faith and philosophical communities endure by providing them with a framework and language that helps them positively articulate their own identity in a diverse society, while at the same time building positive relationships with the various people around them. In other words, engaging in interfaith community projects and initiatives does not reduce one's individual or congregational identity, but enhances it. It is not a reduction to our common denominators, but an elevation to our greater flourishing and vitality as individuals and as congregations. For example, during the pandemic, our interfaith community continued to meet every month. And when we checked in each month, we talked about the state of our individual congregations. How are we all doing? How are our individual communities doing? What are the unique challenges and opportunities and joyous successes we are experiencing? How can we help one another? And these questions matter because the vitality of the third space that is interfaith leadership and community is dependent on the vitality of each member organization. 5, creating binding narratives for diverse societies. Finally, a major benefit of our interfaith community development and life together is that it produces narratives for why diverse societies must be celebrated and resourced. Narratives, or the collective stories and events that make up a group or of any size, are powerful and necessary building blocks of community. Narratives shape how we live, how we interact, what we believe is possible, and what our work is to be together in this life. As Native American writer Thomas King offers, the truth about stories is that that is all we are. And therefore, the narrative that we are creating, collecting, and continuing forward is of essential interest to us. For regardless of our actions, events will unfold. Stories will be written, narratives will transform. And so it is incumbent upon us to ensure that we are offering a glimpse of a narrative that we long to make ever more real and central to the future of our community and the world. So it brings us back to that somewhat flippant but oh so serious consideration. What now? Well, we captured over 2 pages of ideas, suggestions, and great tips to ensure our path forward is sustainable and effective. A major theme was staying committed to the long view and to look at this work as not one-off, but cumulative. Another theme was, as mentioned earlier, food. You might recall a tradition that hasn't returned since the pandemic, but was very meaningful to many of you, which is the small group dinners program here at UUCCI, where shared meals would happen either in people's homes or here on the campus. Could you imagine a coordinated effort to create a Columbus interfaith small group dinner program across this region? Would you attend such a dinner? Would you consider hosting? Things to consider. Finally, one of our themes was about getting more people involved in the dreaming and scheming, planning, and co-creation of programs, opportunities, and initiatives. There is wisdom, skill, passion, and energy in so many pockets of our interfaith community and in this room. And it asks us to answer the question, how will we open the abundance of possibility, creativity, and resilience to foster community in ways that are not linear, centralized, and hierarchical, but rather nonlinear, decentralized, and collaborative? This is our work to imagine and make real. By getting beyond the campus, we will be able to take our vision of being a beacon for diverse religious thought and courageous action wherever we go. As you use, we can be, like Emerson wrote for the lyrics of our centering hymn, a religion which, like sunshine, goes everywhere. Its temple, all space, its shrine, the good heart, its creed, all truth, its ritual, works of love. May that be our calling for today, and as we move into a future that needs our love and courage, our hope and commitment, our promise to one another within these walls, upon this campus, and in the wider community, that we will not leave one another in good or in troubled times, but that we are united in love for whatever may come in this emergent spring. May it be so, and amen.